Good evening, dear viewers. Today, we will take a fascinating journey across centuries and millennia to touch one of the greatest mysteries of human culture. You have undoubtedly heard of the tale known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. But have you ever stopped to ask what this ancient legend is really about? Its story began more than 5,000 years ago. It is a monumental tale of a king who was part god and part man, filled with astonishing journeys, monsters, angry deities, and desperate attempts to escape the one thing no one can avoid, death itself. And it all began with a mighty ruler, intoxicated by his own strength and beauty, unable to restrain his earthly passions. Imagine it around 4,000 years ago, a Sumerian thinker, whom scholars believe was named Sin, Leki, Anini, set down scattered oral traditions on clay tablets. Then, in the year 1849, in northern Iraq, in the ruins of ancient Nineveh, the pickaxe of the British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard broke through the vaults of the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal. Among the clay fragments crumbling with age, researchers found a text that can rightfully be called the foundation of all heroic epics on Earth. The history of human storytelling goes back more than 40,000 years. At the dawn of time, our ancestors left their messages as drawings on cave ceilings, while stories were passed only from mouth to mouth. But about 5,500 years ago, the Sumerians carried out a true revolution. They invented cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped signs pressed into wet clay. For about 500 years, this method served only practical purposes, keeping track of food supplies and collecting taxes. But then came the realization that the same signs could preserve poetry, prayers, and legends. With the arrival of writing, words that once disappeared into the air the moment they were spoken gained immortality. And the Epic of Gilgamesh became one of the first great works ever granted the honor of stepping into eternity. Gilgamesh was the ruler of Uruk, the true heart of the civilization of ancient Mesopotamia. Within him, 2/3 were divine and 1/3 was human. The epic opens by praising his greatness. He built the mighty walls of his city to protect its people. He had no equal in beauty, in strength, or in sharpness of mind. His mother was the wise goddess Ninsun, and his father was the mortal king Lugalbanda. For the Sumerians, city walls had sacred meaning. They did not merely protect against wild beasts and raiding nomads. They marked the very boundaries of civilization itself, creating a space for order, creation, and the development of society. Yet despite these achievements, the people of Uruk suffered under the heavy hand of their ruler. Gilgamesh was their shepherd, but he behaved like a cruel tyrant. He drove his subjects into exhausting labor and believed that everything in the city belonged to him alone. What outraged the people most was his claim to the bride on her wedding day. By force, he took young women into his chamber before their husbands could do so. The people cried out to the gods for protection, and the supreme god Anu, hearing their groans, called upon the great mother Uru, the very one who had once shaped the first humans from clay. Anu ordered her to create a being equal to Gilgamesh in strength, so that his wild and lawless nature might finally be restrained. So Enkidu was formed from clay, a child of nature who knew neither law nor human speech. He was covered in thick hair, lived among the open Yoli, shared watering places with wild animals, and knew nothing of city life. One day, a young hunter who had tracked game for 3 days ran home in fear to his father. He told him of a mighty wild man who broke traps, filled in hunting pits, and saved the animals from death. The wise old man advised his son to go to Uruk and bring back a temple woman of love named Shamat. so that her charms might draw the giant out of the wilderness. Gilgamesh approved the plan. Shamet met Enkidu at the watering place. For 6 days and 7 nights they lay together in love. When Enkidu later tried to return to his herd, the gazelles scattered in fear. He had lost the lightness of the beast, but in return he had gained something greater, a human mind. The priestess told him of the great city of Uruk and of the invincible Gilgamesh. Proud Enkidu took this as a challenge and decided to prove that he alone was the strongest being on earth. Meanwhile, in Uruk, Gilgamesh was troubled by ominous dreams. His mother interpreted them to mean that soon a mighty man, equal to him in strength, would come to the city, become his loyal companion, and save him from many disasters. On the way to the city, shepherds taught Enkidu to eat bread and drink strong beer. A barber shaved away his wild hair, and his body was rubbed with fragrant oils. With every new custom, he left more of his animal past behind. When Enkidu entered Uruk, he learned that a wedding was being prepared and that Gilgamesh once again intended to violate the honor of the bride. Driven by a fierce sense of justice, the former wild man blocked the king's path. A battle worthy of titans broke out. They fought with such fury that the earth trembled and the doorposts shook. For the first time in his life, Gilgamesh had met an equal. The battle ended in mutual recognition of strength, and from that recognition grew a deep and unbreakable friendship. Soon afterward, Gilgamesh, consumed by a hunger for great deeds, proposed that they journey together to the faraway mountains of Lebanon, to the sacred Cedar Forest, and kill its dreadful guardian Humbaba. Enkidu tried to dissuade him, reminding his friend that Humbaba had been appointed by the god Enlil himself, and that defying the gods was mortally dangerous. But Gilgamesh answered with words full of pride. The life of man is short, and only great glory can grant immortality in the memory of future generations. After crossing enormous distances, the heroes entered beneath the shadow of the giant cedars. Soon Humbaba appeared, a monster whose roar was like rolling thunder. A terrible battle began, one that ancient people believed shaped the very landscape of the mountains of Lebanon. The sun god Shamash sent 13 mighty winds to blind the guardian of the forest, and Gilgamesh struck the fatal blow. Before dying, Humbaba cursed the victors and foretold that they would not grow old together. The triumphant heroes cut down the tallest cedar to make magnificent gates for a temple and returned to Uruk in great glory. Their deeds attracted the attention of Ishtar, goddess of love and war. Enchanted by Gilgamesh's beauty, she offered to make him her husband, promising him boundless riches. But the king boldly rejected the goddess, reminding her of the fate of all her former lovers, whom she had turned into wolves, crippled birds, and broken horses. Insulted, Ishtar demanded in fury that the supreme god Anu send against the city the monstrous bull of heaven. Anu relented, and a disaster of cosmic scale came down upon Uruk. The breath of the bull dried up the rivers, and the earth split open, swallowing people by the hundreds. Yet the heroes did not retreat. Enkidu seized the beast by its horns, and Gilgamesh drove his sword into it. Drunk on victory, they cruelly insulted the goddess, throwing the entrails of the fallen beast at her feet. For this act of arrogance, the gods passed a harsh sentence: one of the heroes must die, and the choice fell upon Enkidu. Soon Enkidu fell ill. In delirium, he saw a terrible dream in which a dreadful bird carried him down to the underworld, the house of darkness and dust from which there is no return. For 12 days he suffered in fever, lamenting that he was not dying as a glorious warrior in battle, but fading away in weakness upon a bed. At dawn, he was gone. Gilgamesh's grief was immeasurable. He tore at his clothes as he mourned his brother in arms. For 7 days and 7 nights he sat beside the body of his friend, refusing to bury him until he saw the first signs of decay. Only then did he understand the terrible truth: death is inevitable, and one day it will come for him as well. Consumed by a primal fear, Gilgamesh cast off his royal robes, put on a lion's skin, and went out into the wild steppe in search of the secret of eternal life. He resolved to find Utnapishtim, the only human being who had survived the Great Flood and had been granted immortality by the gods. His path led him through the gates of the sun, a dark tunnel through which the sun itself traveled by night. For 12 long hours he walked in absolute darkness, until he emerged into a wondrous garden where trees glittered with precious stones instead of leaves and fruit. There, at the edge of the world, he met the wise Siduri. Seeing the exhausted king, covered in dust, she spoke words that became one of the greatest philosophical revelations in all ancient literature. "Gilgamesh, where are you hurrying? The life you seek you will not find. When the gods created mankind, they assigned death to humanity, but kept life in their own hands. Rejoice in each day, wear clean bright clothes, love your children and your wife. That is the true lot of man." But Gilgamesh would not yield. With the help of a ferryman, he crossed the deadly waters and stood before Utnapishtim. The ancient old man told him the story of the Great Flood, a story that many centuries later would echo in other world religions. Utnapishtim explained that immortality had been granted to him under unique circumstances, by the whim of the gods, and that no divine council would ever be gathered again for the sake of one king. To prove the weakness of human nature, Utnapishtim challenged Gilgamesh to remain awake for 7 days, but the exhausted hero fell asleep that very instant. When he awoke, he finally understood the futility of trying to conquer time. As a parting gift, the old man revealed the secret of a miraculous plant that could restore youth. Gilgamesh retrieved it from the bottom of the sea and intended to bring it back to the old men of his city. But on the return journey, while the king bathed in a cool spring, a serpent stole the plant, shed its old skin, and slipped away renewed. Left with nothing, the great king wept bitterly. When he returned to Uruk, he climbed the mighty walls of his city and looked out over its towers, temples, and flourishing gardens. And then understanding came to him. He realized that immortality does not lie in magical elixirs. The true legacy of a human being lies in the fruits of labor, in creation for the good of others, in what remains through the ages after a person is gone. That is the story of Gilgamesh. It is the first epic work in human history, and even today, through the weight of thousands of years, it asks us the same question: what trace will you leave upon this earth? A human being is mortal, but humanity that creates and remembers is immortal. Until we meet again, dear comrades.